All right, we are live. Welcome, everyone, from Yellowknife. So, if this video cuts out, it's because the Northwest Territories does not have the greatest Wi-Fi connection. So, we'll do our best. I will try and stay in here. And this one is, of course, episode is dedicated to all the poor mannequins that we lost over the last week in Alberta. Just take a drink for every mannequin that died in the last week. It's a real tragedy. As you saw, CTV was reporting horrible conditions in the Alberta ICU as one mannequin needed three separate respirators. This is just how bad it is. And it's your fault. It's really your fault. And it's my fault because I criticize. Listen, I'm I would say I'm like a mass murderer, but I'm clearly worse than that because I criticized the government, which led to the death of this mannequin, which again needed to take up an ICU bed and three different respirators at the time because this is clearly the most serious thing that we are ever dealing with. So take a drink now, pause and reflect on that poor mannequin who lost his life because of you and Jason Kenney and me, but not so much Jason Kenney anymore. Jason and Kenney has officially come back. He's now a reasonable person. He's doing everything that the unions are telling him to do, which is good because questioning science is bad for science. So again, kids, remember, if you want to be a good scientist, never question anything ever. And generally do what they tell you. Again, that was what Rage Against the Machine was all about. Is F you, I will do what they tell me. Um, you know what? Great, great stuff. Okay. So, okay. Welcome everyone. Okay, so we got you know this is the best comment ever, Donna. That's what happened if we had more windmills. Because later in the show, we are going to have to talk about how stupid the windmills are. So we will be talking about my favorite things, which are government mandates and vaccine mandates, and the friggin' windmills causing an energy crisis. So there will be a Halloween, very scary, a bureaucrat off in somewhere in Scotland. I think in Edinburgh. In Edinburgh, there's going to be a climate conference, and of course, we don't need COVID rules for that. Anyone there can go there and lick a bureaucrat. Party time, strippers and blow, because for the climate. So everyone's going to take a private jet, fly in, and then lecture other people on their fossil fuel usage. We also have a ton of propaganda coming out from the Canadian media vis-a-vis all this nonsense. And all right, let's get into it. So the mannequins are dead, but this is like, yes, it's funny, and that was a great thing that we saw. It's like, okay, they put up the picture of the mannequin dying. It was all very silly. You can make the excuses for them, right? You can make the excuse for the mannequin thing, like they were just going for a picture of someone in ICU and they didn't want to take a picture of someone real and then break in there, like because of COVID restrictions, they couldn't get a picture of an actual COVID patient, so they just made one up. And that mannequin actually symbolizes someone real who's in the ICU. You can make that case. You can make that case. And if this was in a vacuum, I would. You should know that I do this at 8 p.m. Wednesdays. That was an unexcusable phone call by that friend. That friend just lost one friend point. Okay. Sorry, not sorry everyone. Okay, that would be excusable in vacuum. You can make an excuse for the fake mannequin photo in an absolute vacuum. And I just made it, right? You can't see a real COVID patient, so they just made one up to show what it looks like, to get a picture of someone who's having a serious COVID reaction. Because let's be honest, there are some people who seriously are going to be dying of COVID. There are some people, you could say some people will die of the vaccine. You could say that too. Well, some people will die of the flu. You can say that too. Yes, there's billions of people, their diseases. Okay, we can talk about that. However, I'm going to post an article here from our friend Wyatt Claypool at the National Telegraph about the utter mismanagement or the basic propaganda where the AHS in Alberta, the Alberta Health Services, they have been consistently manipulating the data. Okay? So you could say, all right, you know what? That was just an excuse to mannequin. But the reason why it's not a valid excuse, other than it's a bit flimsy, is this is part of a wider pattern of behavior, of lies and mismanagement surrounding COVID. right? So, as I said, if that had been in a vacuum and had the media been pretty good, okay, I'll pause for a laugh break there as everyone can catch their breath. Had the media been pretty good and honest and fair with this thing, we could say, okay, you know what, COVID restrictions, you couldn't do this, that. All right, whatever. What we cannot say though is they're not doing their best because they've clearly lied, they've clearly mismanaged, and as you see in the article, like a lot of the hoopla around Alberta's COVID crisis is sort of generated by the unions. It's the nurses union who is mad at Jason Kenney from fights existing pre-COVID, being run by and backed by heavy NDP donors, essentially lying about the statistics and changing the baselines and changing the numbers to create a crisis. So, I mean, at the beginning of this, Kenney, right, gave funding to the AHS and nurses union to build over 1,000 ICU beds. So they have the funding for over 1,000 ICU beds, but they haven't opened them up. Instead, they're going on the normal baseline, right? They move the baseline back down to, 380 or something beds that they have. So the Alberta government gave money for over 1,000, but they just aren't building them. It's said they seem to be using this money to pay themselves and bureaucrats to complain about not having enough money. Shocking a union would do that. I know, shocking. I hope you're all sitting down for this news, but if not, if you just missed it and you're walking in, take a seat, everyone, as I inform you that sometimes unions mismanage money, don't give it to their members, but instead use it to pay themselves and people at the top higher amounts and higher salaries. And then they advocate for more money because their members don't have enough money. I know, shocking. You might, do that. Oh, here's a great question. What did I think of Project Veritas' last video? I think I almost got suspended and kicked off Facebook because in the comments section, I linked to a Project Veritas video. I got suspended for 7 days. I couldn't appeal it. Luckily, a friend of mine was able to appeal it for me. And then I've never had an appeal overturned. But because it was in a comment section, like I think he lied and said, he was saying he was bad. And they're like, okay, whatever. So I got lucky on that one. So yeah, I'm very much in support of Project Veritas videos. Now, the one thing I will say I'm not sure which one you mean. If you mean the one about the Pfizer employees and the Pfizer leaks, that was the subject of last week's video. And I mean, my full opinions on that are in last week's Wednesday night video. So yeah, I think it's great journalism. Now, there's one thing where there's another one that came out. If you mean the one about the fetal tissues being used in the vaccine, and this is a more complicated issue. Now, I'm in favor. Listen, this is one of the harsh realities of stem cell research. Stem cell research is pretty amazing research. If you understand science, right? Stem cells are highly pliable. They can turn into any different type of cell, which make them very, very, very valuable for medical research. However, you tend to get them from aborted pregnancies, miscarriages, and they don't come from the greatest ethical sources, right? So if someone gets an abortion, it makes sense that you should give the fetal. Now, I think it's unethical to sell stem cells to medical research. I think they should be donated, so some good comes out of something bad. But the fact that stem cells are being used and fetal tissue being used, therefore, in these vaccines, makes a lot of sense. Now, the big revelation, though, is they are lying about it. And the reason they are lying about it is rather obvious, because having stem cells in a vaccine, listen, it doesn't make it unsafe. It makes sense if you understand science. And listen, sometimes there's harsh realities in science. And it makes sense why stem cells would be in a lot of things, because stem cells have immense medical potential. However, they also present people with an ethical dilemma. And when people have legitimate ethical dilemmas, like some of you might be very Christian, Muslim, Jewish, whatever, we're just really anti-abortion. And a lot of you would have an ethical conundrum using something that has stem cells in your body, right? You might say, listen, I believe the vaccine's effective, but I don't want to use products that have anything to do with abortion. And I think that's another legitimate reason for someone to refuse the vaccine. And the reason they're covering up is because they want to, of course, hush, anything that would give people a legitimate reason to turn down the use of the vaccine. Now, again, I'm not opposed to using stem cells in medical research. I understand it, but I know some people are. So if it's that video, that's where I'm like, the things they're lying about it, but like anyone who really understand, I don't expect everyone to really understand, vaccine science and medical research and be experts on it. But if you understand it, right? If you copied and paid attention off my biology homework in high school, you would probably know that it, it's it's very likely that stem cells would be used in the vaccine. So if that's what we're talking about, then that's sort of my opinion on it. Is like I get it, but you shouldn't lie about it. Again, you should be open and honest with people. But the reason they are lying is because it gives people another reason to refuse it from religious ethical standpoint, right? Then it'd be hard to argue that people shouldn't have religious exemptions to this vaccine if it has parts in it that were manufactured and in part had to do with abortion. So it becomes another complex ethical issue, and the government doesn't want you to deal with that. Pfizer doesn't want you to deal with that because, again, Pfizer wants these vaccines mandated so they can make them for 10 billion years, and then we can all have boosters every single day, right? We just every day, just wake up, vaccinate yourself, go on to work. Actually, that's not the ideal thing the government wants. Sorry. Wake up, vaccinate yourselves, collect UBI, and then, get your government weed and vote for Trudeau. That's what I'm going to do today. Well, I'm already up. So I have not got my UBI or my vaccine yet today, but don't worry. Tomorrow I'll be getting another vaccine. I get vaccinated almost like I don't get it every day because that's ridiculous, but every 2 or 3 days, just get a vaccine. Vax up. All right. Okay. So let's talk more about the HS. So you have this problem where the mannequins are dying, right? And it is tragic that we're losing these mannequins. I really think of places like the Bay, Walmart, Zellers, places that are just losing their mannequin staff by the hundreds. It's just going down, right? And as I said, you can make the excuse if this was a one-time thing, but this is clearly in a pattern of behavior for the AHS and the media. So the AHS has been manipulating the numbers. They are not going to. They have funding for 1,000 more ICU beds. They could have built them. They choose not to. They choose not to use them. They choose to fire the nurses who aren't vaccinated so they can artificially lower the staff, then artificially bring down the baseline or refuse to bring up the baseline, right? So then they can scream, we're being underfunded, it's an emergency, and then the media can get on it and then pump people full of fear porn. Because once you got people afraid, like a lot of people are just so afraid of COVID that there's people waiting by their phones every day for the new COVID numbers. Like there's people in Ontario going like, we were at 317 yesterday. Oh, we're at 345 today. Ah, ah, ah. And then tomorrow, oh, we're at 326. Oh, it's going down. Ah. And then it's like watching horse racing, right? That's where we're at. Of course, mannequin lives do matter, right? And anyone who disagrees is racist and transphobic and Islamophobic. But what happens when a black Muslim makes fun of trans people? We'll get to that one later. With the Dave Chappelle special. Okay. Now, I'm not sure how many of you saw this, but I'll send you like this tweet from, Rachel Notley. So there was a story, and this is Notley's tweet on it, and this doesn't make me feel good. And I don't like talking about this because, okay, there's a 14-year-old boy in Alberta who died as a saying of COVID. And that kid was in the hospital because he had stage 4 brain cancer, okay? And stage 4 brain cancer is terminal. And 2 days, because he was in hospital, he probably caught a hospital-borne infection. This time it was COVID, and he died. Now, he died primarily because of the brain cancer, but because he had a positive COVID test, they counted him as a COVID thing. Now, the family tried to, again, so the disgusting thing here is, let's just talk about what normally happens in these scenarios. There is, and I'm not saying hospitals are bad. Hospitals are great. Modern medicine is great. It's great that we have new medical technologies. But one of the most dangerous things you can do is go to a hospital. I'm not sure if you saw that like death chart thing. Like going to a hospital is more dangerous than smoking a pack of cigarettes. Now, a lifetime smoker is obviously more dangerous, but the reason it is like, it makes sense. Hospitals are where there is a lot of sick people. If you're in a place where there is constantly tons of sick people, you're more likely to catch an illness there. That's why prolonged hospital stays are not often advised. Sometimes they're needed, and then often people who become bedridden and need and need all this massive medical work done on them. They end up dying in hospital of hospital-borne infection. It's a common thing, right? Hospital-borne infection. Like eventually, you're just in there. You get a bug that's around in the hospital. Your immune system is already pretty depressed because of whatever put you in the hospital in the first place, and then you die, right? So, and this is something that we need to sort of have a better understanding of in a society, not because like, oh, hospital are dangerous, but it's also to like tell you to like, you know, don't go to a hospital unless you absolutely need to is one of the things, and that's good because again, socialized healthcare, less burdensome in the system. It's also like, and this became a big problem, especially in COVID with all the nursing homes. Like there's a lot of rhetoric at the beginning, but like we were all mad at nursing homes and nursing home doctors because like the death and the nursing homes and the neglect and then like, and I was talking about like, listen, there's trade-offs in a nursing home. This is how they work. But a big problem is because of the vilification of all the nursing homes, it then forced families to force doctors and administrators to do the lawyer stuff, right? And what the lawyers tell you to do for safety precautions often isn't the safest thing. It's just something that you can argue to a judge who knows nothing about safety. And this would be send him to hospital. So, I have a dad who deals with this all the time. Like, you got palliative patients, they're sick, they got a few weeks of life left. And then the families want to do all these crazy interventions and send them to hospital. And, he'll try and you got to do what they say. You send them, but he'll also say, like, listen, you send this type of person to a hospital from the nursing home, they're going to be dead within 3 days because they have so many things that you can't fix it. And even if you fix one thing, it doesn't get them. And then they're more likely to get an infection in a hospital. And then here, at least in a nursing home, they're in their room. There's someone who they're in a familiar setting. You take someone in a palliative situation out of a familiar setting, you put them in a hospital, you do all these interventions. It's highly stressful. It depresses the immune system. There's all these viruses going around. You're then likely to die of a hospital-borne infection. So in this case, the hospital-borne infection happened to be COVID to a boy who was terminally ill with stage 4 brain cancer. Okay. And I wanted to give sort of the reference because I don't want to focus too much on this kid and only to say because his family did come out and get very mad at the politicians trying to say he died of COVID because they were using this. And the sort of disgusting thing where I feel really uncomfortable here is because the politicians started using it, the AHS started using it, is like they started publicizing a 14-year-old boy died yesterday of COVID, a totally preventable disease. It's your fault. It's your fault. It's your fault. Right? Then it came out he has stage 4 brain cancer. And it was actually the family who was leading the charge to say, no, this wasn't COVID. This was stage 4 brain cancer. And you totally understand the family's point of view. And, I don't think the family has any responsibility to do anything here, right? They just lost their son. It's totally up to them how they want to pursue this, right? And they, as I would empathize with, and this would probably be me, I would not want my son used as a political prop. Just in anything, even for a cause I believe in. I would not want my dead child who died of brain cancer to be used as a political prop, even if it was like, he died because of the Muslim Brotherhood in government, right? It's like there are other reasons why we shouldn't have the Muslim Brotherhood advising the government on anti-racism training, right? My son died is not one of them. I can make a legitimate argument without look at this dead child. I don't like that. And also like the martyring of the dead, it reeks too much to me of religious extremism, right? The glorification of the people who died, the glorious martyrs. I don't like any of that. I find it really, really sleazy to do. But again, so this family didn't want their son used as a political prop. But here you have Rachel Notley and a whole group of doctors. I have so I gave the Rachel Notley tweet. Where are all these doctors? Here's a good list of all these doctors who pushed fake news here, and said, oh, oh, horrible, just because he comorbidity. It's like, because some of these doctors, you read some of the tweets they're saying, and they're like, oh, it's so dishonest for the AHS to downplay this death because of comorbidities. It's like, yeah, brain cancer is a bit more than a comorbidity, people. All right? This kid died of brain cancer, and to scaremonger and make everyone believe that their children aren't safe unless they give in to the government demands is reprehensible. And Rachel Notley, even after got pushed back, Rachel Notley, he says, I'll read to you what I put. The child has died of COVID-19. they were just 14. Again, no gender. Telling their loved ones that they were other healthy, telling their loved ones that there were other health complications that contributed to death offers no comfort whatsoever. No matter what pre-existing conditions they had, this child died during a fourth wave that was preventable. This shouldn't have happened. We need to know what will be done to stop it from happening again. Okay, so there's so many things I hate about this here. It's like, one, she's using the family as this doesn't help the family, when the family was the one trying to tell you to correct yourself. So this is disgusting on so many fronts. So not only is she using the dead child to prop up her own political ideology, she's also using that child's family. 3, she's using that child's family against the express wishes of that family. 4, she's pushing the notion of every death is preventable. Okay? No, people are going to die. That is the reality of the world. If I am Prime Minister of Canada, I promise you that every year I am Prime Minister, at least one Canadian will die. Probably more. Probably every day a Canadian's going to die of something. There's millions of you. I can't stop. No one can stop death. Okay? Even the most benign illnesses are going to kill someone. And some of the most horrific illnesses people will recover from. It's just the way of the world. And we've had this, and I talk about it all the time, this sort of the selling of the perfect world. We try and sell people on the absolute perfect world, and it drives me crazy. We're offering, Rachel Notley's purporting to sell you this version of Alberta where no one dies of COVID-19. Right? If we just listen to Rachel Notley, no one dies of COVID-19. And this is an especially nefarious assertion because obviously she's going to fail. And when she fails to prevent all deaths, because remember, when Rachel Notley was Premier of Alberta, there was no COVID-19 and Albertans still died. So is she a murderer? By her logic, a mass murderer, right? But not only does this have a preposition that you know is not going to come true, and you know she is not going to blame herself when it doesn't come true, right? If she were Premier right now, she wouldn't be tweeting every death of COVID-19 is on me and my leadership. I need to be better. I say their names every night before I go to bed. No, you know she's going to blame you, the bad people who don't listen to her, the people who she has the perfect plan, and if people were following her plan, they wouldn't die. But because people choose their freedoms, that is why death keeps happening, right? And it's dangerous. It's dangerous that people are disagreeing with the government. It's dangerous, dangerous, dangerous. And I'm going to save the sort of dangerous rhetoric and for the trans stuff and David Chappelle later, because I think that's this is kind of where a lot of it is connected, and it started pre-COVID. I think a lot of it comes from the histrionics of like dangerous speech. These jokes were dangerous. These dangerous stuff. Okay. So that's the worst part of our world is, I just, I really don't like people using the deaths of children. So I'm going to move off this topic. I think I've talked about it as much as we can. Don't, if you have a political point to make, everyone, make a political point with facts, reason, logic, statistics. You don't need to use dead kids. You don't need to use dead kids. Okay. So there is nothing I love more than the windmills. We all know I love green energy. And you know who else loves green energy? Greta Thunberg. And every world leader who is flying off to Glasgow, where there will be no COVID restrictions, everyone. Don't worry. When the elites meet in Scotland at the end of the month to decide if you're allowed to turn on the heat this winter, or, to tell you why you're a bad person if you complain that your heating bill's up 150% from last year, because again, they know what is best for you. So they are flying on their private jets to lecture you on why flying around the world is bad. So before this, if you don't mind hitting that like button, subscribe, blah, 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 share the video. Sharing and liking and doing stuff, reacting while it's live really helps me out, helps the algorithm, and lets YouTube know that this is definitely content that they should monitor more for hate speech. So every time you click the like button, I get 1 month in jail, 1 extra month in jail for hate speech. So if you want to see me behind bars in jail for hate speech, push some buttons and let's get to this. We're going to put that. Please fact check this. All politicians are liars. You have been fact checked. You get a gulag. Hello, Gerald. All right, I see. Okay, so we're on the brink of an energy crisis, and this is so easily preventable. So easily preventable. And I know listen, some of you might have heard my rant about green energy and fossil fuels before, but you know what? Everyone take a deep breath, get your ears ready, because we're gonna effing do it. We're gonna friggin' do it because the energy crisis is coming. The elites have manufactured it. It is beyond stupid. Beyond stupid. So fossil fuels are bad. Green energy is good. What's green energy? I don't know. It's green. It's green. It's green. It's green. Now, what we need the Paris Accords. We need Paris Accords. We need Klaus Schwab and Greta Thunberg. Tell us what to do. Tell us what to do, Greta. Tell us. We are waiting for what will Justin Trudeau decide to tell us to do next. We must reduce carbon emissions. We must reduce carbon emissions to meet with the Paris Accords, because at the Mount Sinai, God gave Moses the Paris Accords, the 10 tenets of the Paris Accords. You remember the story from the Bible, right? When Moses went up Mount Sinai, got the Paris Accords from God, and then gave them to us. So the Paris Accords are means of reducing our carbon emissions, because everything must be measured in carbon emissions. Carbon is the only gas that we can measure things by. It's a univariate analysis. Guys, climate change is very complicated, right? So complicated. We need 1 billion scientists and $1 trillion to solve it. It's so complicated, yet we amalgamate every single environmental issue, which they are real. We throw them into one metric called climate change. We call it very complicated, and we evaluate climate change on a univariate analysis, right? Carbon emissions, it's the only thing that we can judge climate change by. Carbon emissions, yay, a univariate analysis of a complicated problem. Every scientist knows that's exactly how you solve things. Okay, now, we need to reduce carbon emissions by getting into the Paris Accords. What's the one country that met the Paris Accord targets? There's only one country since 2016 that met the Paris Accord targets. Who was that? America under Donald Trump. How did they do it? They got the F out of the Paris Accords, because the Paris Accords are stupid. All right, here's how it works. You have coal, and every day China builds a coal plant, whatever. Again, China can do whatever they want because China is our overlords. All praise be Xi Jinping and Dr. Theresa Tam. Praise to Tam. Praise to Tam. Praise to Tam. Okay, so you have the Paris Accords, and they run on carbon emissions, and you have coal. Now, coal was an energy source we first found. Now, coal, the reason why it's dirty is because it has very, very high inefficiency. So when you burn a lump of coal, let's just pull numbers out of our butt like we like to do. Let's say you have 1 pound of coal, right? You burn 1 pound of coal. Of that 100% of coal, let's say about 40% of that gets turned into energy. That means the 60% that isn't being turned into energy, that doesn't power your phone, turn the thing, make the lawnmower go, the 60% is waste or emissions or pollution. Pollution is bad. We all agree on that. Waste is bad. Inefficiency is bad. You could call them all the same thing. Then this miraculous thing called oil appeared. And oil is a more efficient energy source than coal. It is cleaner and greener than coal. So we started to switch more towards oil, right? Because if you burn 1 pound of oil, let's say 70% of that is used as energy, and only 30% of that turns into waste or emissions or pollution. Now we have something amazing called natural gas, and natural gas is 99% as efficient as coal. So you burn natural gas, and most of what you get is actually energy. You don't get a lot of waste, which means that is great, because inefficiency, waste, is also pollution. Natural gas creates less pollution. So when the Trump administration came in, they started to switch more towards natural gas, because everyone should like natural gas. Because if you are an evil, rich oil baron, Yosemite Sam type, just shooting off revolvers at Bugs Bunny or whatever, right? That's who you are. Just red mustache, pew, 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 shooting at the oil. Okay, that's who you are. Then, what do you want? You want money. How do you have money? You want a more efficient product, right? If you have 1 pound of something and you can get 99% of its value to market, well, that's better than the 60% or the 30%, right? So you switch to natural gas because you make more money off of natural gas. Greta Thunberg is happier with natural gas because it creates less pollution. Well, Greta Thunberg doesn't know anything, but I'm happier because I care about the environment. So I like natural gas because it's more efficient, right? The energy companies are happy. The consumer is happy because the price is lower, and the environmentalist is happy. Well, the environmentalist is probably wackadoodle. A reasonable environmentalist like me is happy with natural gas. Now, There's a villain in the story, a mustache twirling villain, and that villain's name is the government, who we should nuke. Right? The government got in, and because natural gas was new and the government is stupid, the government regulates everything it touches. So the reason why the energy sector sucks so much is because Barack Obama, praise be he, peace and blessings be upon him, the prophet Barack came and he was like, government, let's regulate everything. Regulation, 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 regulation. And the environmentalist movement, right? And of course, if you're Saudi Arabia and you sit on top of a bunch of oil, why would you not pay a bunch of Americans to be environmentalists and protest natural gas? Great use of money, Saudi Arabia, to I mean, most of the environmental industry in America is paid for by Saudi Arabia, and most of the Canadian environmental industry is paid for by American oil companies. So stupid. Everything's so stupid. So there you have the government over-regulating natural gas because it's a new product, right? Because they call it scary, right? And they're fracking, bad. And Michael Moore, oh, this is bad for you. God, Americans are so stupid. Americans are unhealthy. Michael Moore. Right? So this is how the world works, right? Then Donald Trump came in and he was like, regulations are stupid. Let's take them away. And then natural gas started to come. And then you started to see less people use coal because natural gas was cheaper and better. So people got off a dirtier energy source and went to a cleaner energy source because of market forces. Yay, market forces, an uninterrupted market force. Took the government out of something and made it better. Oh my God, how could that possibly work? All right, so now we have these friggin' climate crisis, right? And this climate agenda, and now we have an energy crisis because our energy industry is constantly under attack because the people are, oh, we've written a chart, and because the CO2 emissions are like, look at this line and this line, and these numbers we just pulled out of our ass, if they go up, Canada now needs to reduce its carbon footprint to by 95% by 2050. And let's ban cars by 2030. Yay, Justin Trudeau. That's going to help everything. Yeah. How are Canadians in rural Alberta or in friggin' Yellowknife going to heat their homes with windmills? It's not windy here. One of the better, Yellowknife is great. I highly recommend everyone go to the territories. There's a really beautiful shot of the Aurora Borealis Northern Lights. It was absolutely amazing on Monday night. So highly recommend Yellowknife. And it is really cold up here, and it will get to like minus 30, minus 40 in the winter. But it's actually not that bad up in Yellowknife in the winter. One, if you just have the proper winter gear, but it's not that windy. Like, there's no lake effect. So if you're from Toronto, like a lot of the humidity, there's not a lot of humidity. And a lot of the times, the bitter winters, it's where wind is just blowing in your face and makes it uncomfortable. That's way more uncomfortable than it ever gets in Yellowknife because it's not that windy. Now, if it's not that windy, and in the winter, it's also really dark because it's up north. You only have a few hours of sunlight. Well, how the hell are you going to keep the people in Yellowknife from dying, right? If we go to straight green energy, that means we have to unsettle Yellowknife. No one's going to be able to live in Yellowknife or the Northwest Territories or Northern Alberta because it's not enough sunlight for solar power. We don't have enough sunlight in the friggin' summer, and there's nowhere near enough wind for wind energy. And we're going to build the hydroelectric dam around here. So your answer is, fossil fuels. The answer is heating places, right? But we can't ever, so none of this can ever be talked about. That what they're saying is totally unfeasible. There is absolutely no way that we could ever heat these houses up here with the friggin' windmills. Like, what are we talking about? That's a good point. Why would you ever want to be energy independent when you can pretend to save the planet? Stop thinking, start laughing. I love this comment. That's just so true, right? And this is what I always say about the environmental movement. And, W.R. Winter would probably agree with me here, is the environmental movement cares so much more about feeling like it's doing something than actually doing something. Recycling, the windmills, solar plants, this friggin' climate summit. None of it is doing anything. And everyone there knows what they're talking about isn't feasible. But we live in this climate where politicians have to promise us perfect. And there's this sense of mob of radical idiots who go along with this perfect. We need a cleaner climate. The climate's going to kill us all. It's like, yeah, there are serious climate issues. No one's going to deny that there are trade-offs to the modern world, okay? The heavy industrialization has created industrial runoff. There are certain ecosystems that are collapsing and they need to be saved, right? But if you want to save certain ecosystems and you want to clean certain water supplies and you want to reduce pollution over here, the way you do that is you say, everyone, the ecosystems in northern Manitoba, in the whatever forest, are severely in danger. We need to save them. And then Canadians will probably be like, oh, we should save that ecosystem. And Daniel would be cheering you on, right? If you said, there's a eutrophication problem in Lake, we have 1,000 billion lakes, Wanawasku. I made one up. Maybe it's probably a name of a real lake because this is Canada, right? That lake has a eutrophication problem. We need to stop it. I go, yes, let's do that. Because that is money that I know will be spent in Canada to take care of a Canadian problem. However, the problem is, all of those problems I said, they're all amalgamated into one thing called global warming or climate change, right? It's all called climate change. It's all thrown into one problem with every other country's problems, balled up into one big problem. And then instead of fixing that lake, saving that ecosystem by remediating that river, we are throwing $1 trillion to Davos and a bunch of useless numbnuts at the UN to solve climate change, right? And what we get from the solve climate change people is we end up just paying for more propaganda created by a bunch of radical leftists in order to brainwash us into thinking the climate change problem is worse. So we throw more money at the UN so they can have more money to have more propaganda to make us afraid to throw more money at the UN so these problems never get solved. Because when you have this system where everything is climate change, there is no incentive for the people making money off climate change to ever solve climate change. In fact, the financial incentives of the people going to Scotland is for everything in climate and nature to get worse so they can fearmonger about it and then blame the people who disagree with them, right? The planet's literally going to die, and the reason is everyone watching Daniel Boardman's show. Daniel Boardman went off and he yelled at the windmills and he yelled at recycling and he yelled at green energy and he yelled at the Lord and Savior Justin Trudeau and the prophet Greta, right? He yelled at prophet Greta, and that is why things are going bad. And you're a bad person and he's a bad person and everyone here is bad people. Bad. Very, very bad. All right? So this is the frustration. And because of all this decades of stupidity and Justin Trudeau being in charge, we are now going to have a severe energy crisis. We have a carbon tax where we're essentially like, the carbon tax hasn't reduced consumption. It hasn't reduced consumption at all because you need to move, right? The only way, and I'm sure this will, okay, the logic behind the carbon tax saving the planet, okay? And the liberals actually come out and said, the reason why we have the tax is to reduce behavior, right? That's a sin tax. And sin taxes make sense in certain circumstances. So I understand why there's extra taxes on cigarettes and alcohol, right? You want to disincentivize this behavior, right? Because it's not good behavior, but people like to do it. So you disincentivize it with the sin tax. And we can argue about sin tax or whatever. Some people could be more, libertarian. Okay, whatever. But essentially what they're doing is they're turning oil into a sin tax. But the problem is everyone needs oil. Everyone needs energy. You need to heat your house. You need to go from point A to point B. You need to buy groceries. Again, all groceries are created, are both grown and transported by fossil fuels. So by increasing the price of energy, what you're doing is inflating the price of literally everything. You're just making literally everything more expensive, not just at the gas pump. That has a trickle-down effect to literally every sector of the economy. You're driving up the cost of living. You're driving up the cost of heating your home. You're driving up the cost of feeding your kids. And we're in the middle of a pandemic and a crisis and all this, right? And you're just hammering Canadian with increasing prices and massive inflation. So Canadians are getting destroyed by the carbon tax and massive inflation, right? This is so unsustainable. It's mind-blowing. Right? Even the Bank of Canada has now come out and said, yeah, inflation is actually a bad thing, right? After telling us for the last year, inflation, it's good. It's good. And everyone's like, no, it's not good. Like, out of control inflation. Yeah, like, listen, if inflation's going up naturally, again, it makes sense. When I was a kid, a candy bar and a vending machine cost $1. Now it costs $1.25. Okay, yeah, over the course of 15 years, the price of a candy bar went up 25 cents. Like standard, okay? No one's complaining about that. We were talking about massive money printing schemes with the Bank of Canada, printing money and then giving it to everyone for free, and then having crises and not being able to pay back our debt, so printing more money and using printed money to pay for everything, driving up the prices of everything, because you don't increase wealth. Money isn't wealth. Money is a psychotechnology created by humans that quantifies debt or value. I guess I should use value instead of debt, even though debt is a proper evolutionary psychology term, and this is an evolutionary psychology word. People tend to misinterpret debt. I should say value. I should also stop delivering my own soliloquy on stage during a live show, but I do it anyway. Now I've lost myself. Okay, you get what I mean. Inflation is bad. Crazy inflation, we're going to hit hyperinflation, isn't good. Like how the Bank of Canada can say, oh, no worries about inflation. See Zimbabwe, see Venezuela, see Venezuela. Absolutely mind-blowing. Mind-blowing stupidity. My mind is blown by the stupidity. So, who benefits from this? The Saudis. Like, one of the great things about Donald Trump is one of the reasons why Saudi Arabia and Mohammed bin Salman started to liberalize so quickly is like, yes, there's the stuff and the global alliance against Iran and all that, but there's another lever in which the international politics play, and Saudi Arabia has a lot of influence when we are stupid and can't get our energy sector in control. Like when we ban the use of pipelines but still need oil and have to get it from Saudi Arabia, they have way more leverage over us, right? So they can boycott us over some, what did they do? The Raif Badawi stuff, which we should free Raif Badawi. Saudi Arabia should free Raif Badawi. It's stupid they still have him locked up, right? But when they went after Canada like that, and no one took Canada's side, and because Canada has no leverage, right? But the reason why one of the main reasons why Saudi Arabia was becoming so much more liberal from the year 2016 to the year 2020 was because Donald Trump made the Americans more energy independent. And because America was less reliant on Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia had less power to influence American outlook, and America then had more leverage over Saudi Arabia, America could make Saudi Arabia act more like America rather than Saudi Arabia influencing America to be more in line with Saudi values. That's one of the realities of geopolitics. So as we become more energy independent, a lot of the countries that are less than stellar on their human rights record, but have massive energy reserves, right? If we have our own energy reserves and can compete with them and they don't have leverage over us, well, then if their single commodity is not enough to control the market, then in order to gain influence and gain acceptance and gain political influence, they then have to moderate themselves towards the Western standards to gain Western support. Right now, Saudi Arabia can go back to gaining Western support by basically pushing us around and having all the energy because the left in our countries makes being energy independent and making our own naturally produced way cleaner energy almost impossible to obtain rather than getting their energy. So again, that's another side effect of all these stupid energy policies is women's rights. Like women's rights have been delayed because of the radical left's energy policies. Had we been reasonable on energy for the last couple decades, Saudi Arabia would probably be way more advanced in terms of civil liberties, and a lot of the Arab world and the Gulf states and the OPEC nations would be a lot more liberal, and probably there'd be a little bit more women's rights. But again, women's rights are a bad thing in certain scenarios, as we will talk about now. Okay, so I was on the radio today. We talked about Dave Chappelle, Saga 960. Actually, it'll probably be tomorrow's episode. So yeah, Saga 960 tomorrow. I'll talk more about this, but I do want to cover the Dave Chappelle special. And a lot of you heard, maybe didn't hear. Dave Chappelle was trending on Twitter because of his new special, The Closer, which good name. It's like the end of his big deal with Netflix. Good for him. His third special was very subpar. It wasn't that funny, but I don't blame him because he had to make 3 specials in a year. And it was kind of just for money, so whatever. So I wasn't too excited about his next one because I thought, he's already burned through a lot of stuff. But then I saw Twitter had exploded because he's the worst person ever. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to watch this. And I'm glad I did because it was very good. And listen, there are jokes in there that, there's like one joke particularly that I didn't agree with its politics. And it personally affected me, let's say, right? The space Jews joke, right? Essentially, he made the joke that, basically saying that, Jews had no connection to Israel. Like they used to be there, they all left, and they just came back randomly and displaced the indigenous population. That's not true. That's Soviet era propaganda. But it's been so well adopted into mainstream ideology, like the Soviets and the left have done such a great job of promulgating classic anti-Semitism, that I don't blame Dave Chappelle for saying it, and I don't blame people for understanding it or thinking it's funny. Like, I laugh too, right? But again, does that joke promote something negative? Yeah, it promotes. Yeah, I understand the concept of the joke is that Jews had left Israel, but then just came back all of a sudden, which isn't true. They've always been there. But you know what? That was a comedian, and he was making a joke during a comedy special, and it was kind of funny. So I laughed, and I moved on with my day, right? And that was worse than anything he said about the trans. And again, all of that isn't that bad. Like, again, it's. I'm not gonna. Well, he made a joke about the Jews. I don't care. I don't care, right? So one of the fascinating things you'll see is I read the articles that complain about this Netflix special from the trans lobby, and none of them identify what he said in the special that is so terrible. At no point do they say, this is what he said that was offensive. This is the bad part. And this made me feel bad because. So I started to get to this part because one of the common themes you will see throughout the trans hysteria over Dave Chappelle is, the dangerous speech. This is dangerous. And I've seen this is a lot of the trans lobby is trying to make this argument that what Dave Chappelle is doing leads to violence. Okay. So the reason Dave Chappelle is dangerous, he's making jokes about marginalized trans, and he's making jokes and saying we don't exist and blah, 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 blah. Right. So just generally being, horribly annoying idiots. But the arguments are saying is, yes, this trans hating, which is not making jokes about transgender ideology, it leads to violence, and people are violent, and then trans people are murdered because of these jokes and these words. Okay. Now let's take this and just flip it back around on two metrics. One, do you remember the story a couple years ago? I was one of the few people that covered it, but a rape crisis center was vandalized and attacked with death threats, saying "Die turfs die," because that was the one rape crisis center in Vancouver which didn't allow biological men to. It was only for biological women. Right, and if you want context around this is at the time of Jessica Yanev going into spaces for women only and sexually assaulting them, and then basically saying everyone who went against her is transphobic, and then taking the most vulnerable people to the human rights tribunals because the system is broken. Right, there's also a trans guy who was going around, and this man was going into women's crisis shelters and pretending to be a woman and saying things like, "Oh, they don't want me here. Some people are offended by seeing my lady boner in the morning." And basically, we're putting tweets out there saying that if any woman was uncomfortable, again, if any woman who is running away and in a rape crisis shelter, if a woman in a rape crisis shelter is upset that someone with an erect penis is sleeping beside them and waking up in the morning and swinging around their genitals, if they're upset, well, then they can suck his phallus. Now, this man thought he was a woman, but as I've talked about before, anyone who weaponizes their identity as trans doesn't get to be called a she or a he. They are their biological gender, and I will not play into your game. Jessica Yanev is a man. Now, whereas I do know trans people, there's that I'm happy to use their preferred pronouns because they're just trying to live their lives. I'm not going to fault anyone for wanting to live their lives. I'm pretty libertarian on this. But once you start to weaponize your identity to harm other people, then, shut up, you're a man. So let's put the shoe on the other foot. Was the rape crisis center that was vandalized with Die turfs die threatening to rape and kill rape victims and the people who help rape survivors, threatening them with death, being cheered on and encouraged by the leading trans activist in Canada, Morgan O'Shea? Do you not think that the radical rhetoric directed against that rape crisis center might have led people to actions that harmed rape victims? Again, so shoe on the other foot here, right? And the answer is, you know what? Yeah, sometimes words do lead to actions. And sometimes there is, let's say, bad speech out there, right? Hitler's beer hall push, right? If you have a German guy in a tiny mustache at a beer hall yelling about the Jews and the Aryan race, this is bad speech. However, there is a very fine line between speech and action, right? So people are allowed to say things, and how we counter speech is with better ideas. So if there's bad ideas out there, before they turn into actions, it is our job to counter them with good ideas. right? That is how a free society works, because there's a massive difference between speech and words. But what the trans activists are trying to do is say that anything that goes against the narrative is dangerous, right? Their narrative is good. The narrative is there to protect people's lives. And if you go against the narrative, then we're going to weaponize the trans suicide statistics against you, right? The trans suicide statistics, which, again, I'm loath to use any suicide statistics because they're very hard to pin down to make any argument. So take every argument, including the ones I'm about to make coming up, dealing with suicide statistics, with a grain of salt, because that is how they should be taken. But so we generally have data that says that people post-transitioning do not reduce the transition operations, gender change operations do not reduce suicidality in transgendered people. They don't. All right. And the suicide rate is so incredibly high, so much higher than the general population. You can make a few like this. So if you're going to say the suicide rate for trans is purely due to discrimination, you have a hard time making that case, because the trans suicide rate right now is higher than the suicide rate of Jews during the Holocaust or blacks during slavery. It is very hard to argue, although I don't put it past anyone left to try and argue this, because they're not the big fans of the Yahud. It is very hard to argue that trans people in the 2021 have it much harder, or significantly harder, or just as hard as Jews during the Holocaust. Right? If you want to talk about a hopeless situation, Auschwitz is pretty up there. Right? If someone decides to take their life at Auschwitz, you understand why. Now, why are so many trans people killing themselves? Here is some statistics. Now, we're not saying trans isn't real, but one thing that needs to be talked about when we talk about transgenderism, it's a very substantive fact, and I understand how some people aren't going to like this, and I understand what this fact implies, but I do think it doesn't have a 100% carryover rate, but it does explain some of the trans rise. If you look at transgenderism and its comorbidity with other mental illnesses, it is over 95%, which means if you are transgender, you are extremely likely to have extremely likely to have a mental illness. Now, mental illness is a great predictor of other mental illnesses. So, example, the common link between depression and anxiety is one of them. Depression and anxiety have very high comorbidity. Not as high as depression and transgenderism, or anxiety and transgenderism, or really any mental illness and transgenderism, right? So transgenderism has incredibly high comorbidity, over 95%, with other mental illnesses. So do you think that might explain the suicidality rate just a little bit? Is we're taking a lot of mentally ill people, giving them a solution, which is transgenderism, right? Do you feel other? Do you feel not right in your body? Do you feel uncomfortable with who you are? That explains a lot of human existence to a lot of people, right? See this in the comments. I'll just point those. Thank you. Right? So that explains, that would explain that, maybe there's some very high comorbidity here. Okay. So, let's get in here. Okay. You have the transgender community, which experiences high suicidality, and they're weaponizing the suicidality rate and ignoring all these different things, like the comorbidity with mental illness, ignoring the fact that it's higher than Jews during the Holocaust. So no one can reasonably say transgender people have it worse today than Jews did during the Holocaust. No one can reasonably say that. Yet they are trying to say that and erase that. And the narrative is speech is dangerous. And this is why the transgender lobby serves the left so well. It serves the people at Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and the Liberal Party all so well, because it's lies. It's clearly lies. But it helps build the narrative that words are violence, because it forces everyone to believe a lie, that the reasons transgender people kill themselves is because of social bullying. Now, have some transgender people killed themselves because of social bullying? Yes. Yes. Have some gay people killed themselves because of social bullying? Yes. Have white people? Yes. Black people? Yes. Have some human? Yes. It is something that has happened. Does it explain the incredibly high rate of suicides? No, it doesn't. But by adhering to this narrative and by the transgender law beginning to say, look at all these deaths, they are because of free speech, then the left and the censors get to say, well, see, speech is dangerous because it kills trans people. Speech and misinformation is dangerous because people die of COVID. Because Daniel Boardman's show exists, 10,000 people die of COVID every day. Every day. Everyone is dead of COVID right now. You're all dead of COVID because of this show and the misinformation you are being being put upon. Right? So this is why it serves the narrative so well, and this is why trans is being pushed so hard, because it is such a contradictory rhetoric. And I mean, I went on a bit of the Mark Petroni show, but if you look at the Ontario Human Rights Code, right, if you just look at the transgenderism and all the radical trans and gender rhetoric, it doesn't make sense when you put it all together. And there's two examples of this, okay? There's two things that break all of this. Now, this is illegal to say in Ontario. Luckily, I'm out of Ontario right now. Now, no one's actually been put upon this, but it is legally considered discrimination by the Ontario Human Rights Commission to disagree with gender identity and gender expression, how it's expressed there. And let me just break it down here. Okay, here's two things. And if you go against someone's gender expression or gender ideology, identity, this is hate speech and discrimination. Criminal, by the way. So there's transgenderism. We all understand transgenderism. And the radical trans rhetoric. Now, there's some trans people who say, listen, yeah, I understand I'm born a man. I'm more comfortable living as a woman. I want to live this way. And I want to express myself as a woman. I feel more comfortable. I understand that I have XY chromosomes, and I understand all of that. But this is how I choose to live my life. That's a normal person, okay? Nothing against those trans people. But there is radical trans rhetoric. And the radical trans rhetoric that is legally defined in law. So what is legally defined as transgenderism and the trans rhetoric is, let's say me, right? Let's say I'm Daniel's evil twin, okay? Daniel's evil twin, XY chromosomes, but I feel like I'm a woman, right? And I have my own show, Interrupted, where everyone is interrupted, right? I have 8,000 guests every day. And I've interrupted with evil Daniel Boardman. I can't do my name backwards. Evil Daniel, right? Evil Daniel has a show, but Evil Daniel thinks he's transgender tomorrow. So Evil Daniel has lived 30 years of his life as a man, but then tomorrow decides he's a woman, and he always has been. So the trans radical says, you didn't just become a woman tomorrow. You've always been a woman, and you're actually biologically a woman, right? Because biologically, your brain was female. You had a female brain. You identify as female. Everything was about you as female. The doctors just messed up at birth. And why did I not think of Danielle Boardman, right? Right. So the doctors just messed up at birth, and now you are living your true self. You've always been a woman. You were actually biologically female from the start. There is a basis to gender, right? Gender is real, and you are female, right? That is the radical rhetoric, right? Gender is real, biology is real, and trans people are biologically the gender they identify as and always have been. That is what you must believe legally. Disagreeing with that is hate speech. Here's another problem. One of the other recognized genders in Ontario and Canada is gender fluidity. So I can be gender fluid. So it turns out we actually had a triplet, a neutral Daniel, right? So there's regular Daniel, trans Daniel, but then we have a triplet, right? We'll call him Daniel Boardman, okay? So this triplet is actually gender fluid. One day he's male, one day he's female, another day he's non-binary. Fluidity, or gender fluidity. Your gender changes with the wind. Like all of a sudden, woof, I just felt the breeze and now I'm a woman, right? Woof, I felt the breeze and now I'm a man. This is a real thing, gender fluid, right? And the science behind gender fluidity is that gender and sex are totally immutable characteristics that mean nothing. There's no biological gender, there's no biological sex. It is just purely how you feel, right? But doesn't that just disconnect with what transgenderism, according to the radicals? Because transgenderism argues that yes, you might have been born a man, but you've always biologically been a woman, right? But then gender fluidity says there's absolutely no biology. It's all whims and willy-nilly, right? So you must believe, because disagreeing with either of these two things is legally considered discrimination, yet they contradict each other. right? So believing in one logically contradicts the other, and not believing in either is a crime. So damned if you do and damned if you don't. Everyone is committing a hate crime or a thought crime in Canada, and this is doublethink, right? This is the Orwellian term doublethink. When the government gives you two contradictory things, you have to double think and think of ways to logically make both of them make sense, right? And that's doublethink. And that's, that is one of the bases of the transgender rhetoric these days. And, that's, I like this. My gender sometimes switches to Master P. That's pretty fresh. Okay, so, so there's no he or she then, it's they, them. Listen, guys, put your pronouns in here. Okay. So we have to trust the science when it comes to COVID, but not the science when it comes to gender and sex. Exactly. Now, okay, there's another thing in the double think. So here, let me explain the double think here, right? So you have to trust the science always. But what they're doing with gender and sex is they're saying which scientists are trustworthy. So this is another thing that's helpful. It's which scientists do we listen to? And in terms of gender ideology, what they're trying to do is prop up social scientists as real scientists, because the social scientists have been absolutely corrupted by left-wing ideologues. So it's perfect for the left to promote, basic, so many of the social scientists are scientifically illiterate, can't do math to save their lives, but they know how to purport and explain radical rhetoric. So because they can spew out a bunch of radical rhetoric, they become scientists. So what they're actually doing is you have to trust the scientists, but not the real scientists. They then promote gender scientists. They make a special category. This is an expert on transgenderism. And in order to become an expert on transgenderism, you're often a radical ideologue. So what they're doing is they're taking radical ideologues, calling them experts on transgenderism, and then saying they are the experts and they are scientists. So it's not so much trust the scientists that they're telling us, it's trust the experts, right? And the real question is, who decides who's an expert? And that's the problem for all of this. All right, everyone. That's been tonight's episode. Thank you so much for being here. I got to go eat dinner. I made guacamole. I'll see if my family left any of it for me, because it's good guacamole, because I make good ones. And I will see you all next week and whatever broadcast. Remember, push all the buttons, like, share, subscribe, and get a tattoo of my face onto your face to let everyone know that you are emotionally stable and with it. And don't worry, if you have a tattoo of my face on your face, that does actually count as a vaccine passport. So you are allowed in anywhere because you have a face tattoo. Good night.